Mark, it's interesting. There are so many problems that dealers have with their co-op spend. Tracking it, make sure they're getting reimbursed for it, and just spending it on the correct things. How does COOPABLE come in and fix that problem?
Well, that's a great question. I think that the number one issue that people face is exactly that. So how we help with that is we do an initial audit of the entire co-op account. And we have experts who work for us who have processed co-op at the dealership level for 15 plus years. So nobody who's actually conducting these audits at COOPABLE is anything other than a complete expert. They've done it, they've lived it, they've breathed it, right? So we come in and we complete an audit that takes a look at every single vendor that they're using, looks at every single filing that they've had for the past year. And then we look at the program itself and see where the opportunities lie. And I would say that the biggest problems most people have tend to be just a lack of oversight. They're not really monitoring it and managing it the way that we would hope that they would, right? So we uncover tens of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of funds that are either set to expire or have expired or just being mismanaged and the spend is being wasted. So we complete that audit for them at no really obligation and just give them a complete picture of it from an expert's perspective of here's what you're doing, here's what you probably could be doing, here's probably what you shouldn't be doing. And then we work together to create a plan that allows them to maximize the utilization of that co-op going forward.
Yeah, but it's interesting because so many dealers just don't know what their co-op balance is. And then the other thing, they don't know when they're going to lose the matching funds. That's why so many dealers just turn to IMR turnkey or the equivalent for what Chevy would have for that. So for those who don't know what that means, it's where they can just bill it directly either to that account or to an OEM for those funds for whatever the marketing expense is or the operational expense or the sales expense. So how many times do you see it when you go in and do an audit like this and you find out that a dealer has, you know, not just like $10,000, but $50,000 or hundreds of thousands of dollars just sitting there in co-op spend that they didn't even know existed?
Yeah, it happens more than anybody could possibly imagine. And so, Jordan, there's really two types of people that do this, right? And I think there's one type that comes to us and says, we got it. We're pretty locked down, but if you want to take a look, go ahead. And then there's a second type that says, we have no idea what we're doing and we're really lost. Can you help us? I will tell you, it's typically the first type that's in more trouble because they really think that they know the program. But the problem is that the programs change constantly.
That's right.
Looking at the documentation of these programs, from anywhere from 80, 90, 120 pages worth of documentation. Wow. With everything that dealer has to keep up on with sales, with fixed ops, with variable ops, with headcount, with, you know, God knows what else the general manager is dealing with.
That's right.
It's almost impossible for them to keep up with this. So I'll give you a great example of this. We had a dealership group down in Florida, and they said, we think we're pretty well buttoned up. They had 12 locations, and they said, but you can take a look if you want. Well, at 3 of their locations, we found $390,000, $410,000, and then $440,000 just between 3 locations. So almost $1.4 million that was going to expire. And this was like 4 days from the end of the month. And so it was, all hands on deck trying to get together a plan for them that they could go back to either their existing vendors or find maybe new vendors to find ways to get rid of some of this spend that they had accrued. So it's pretty common, Jordan, that we find anywhere from 20,000 up to, I said, 300,000 to 400,000. I would say it's mostly in that $100,000 to $150,000 range that we're finding.
Yeah.
I spoke to a dealership group this week that they had at one of their locations, a Hyundai location, had $125,000 that had just expired in the past year.
Yeah,
that was just common. And so, it's more common than you would think. And when we find that, it's almost like we're excited, but we're also a little nervous because sometimes, that's not the best news to let somebody know, like, hey, you let $120,000 expire, but here's the plan going forward.
Exactly. And that's what's so mind-blowing. So those 3 rooftops alone that had over $1 million in expiring funds, like, yes, that's not going to go to your bottom line in profit if you keep that. But at the same time, you can use that spend to as a marketing expense so that you can get more of that gross profit, get more sales, get more service, that side of it. That's what blows my mind is there's so much that exists out there in free money, in marketing spend, in operational expense, with co-op funds. And not very many dealers can do it extremely well. And I guess if they do it really well, all you do is you just hire whoever that was that oversaw that, right?
Exactly. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because the folks that we've hired to come in for a COOPABLE as our co-op program managers, they do have that level of expertise at a lot of the largest groups in the country. The problem is, obviously, Jordan, like those people are expensive. Like,
that's right.
If you're going to hire somebody to be that level of expert at your dealership, I mean, you're close to a 6-figure expense for a lot of those folks. I mean, somebody who's really like in it 10, 15 years, I mean, that's what we're paying them.
Yeah, exactly.
So I know that's what they were making before too. So it's like, well, if you are a mega group, you're a public company, whatever, sure, you can afford that. If you've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 15 stores, do you really want to incur that expense? And also, do you really find the right person who does have that level of expertise? They're not easy to find.
Yeah.
So I would say that, it's really kind of this really nice combination that we've been able to find, which is get the level of expertise you need, but don't pay for that level of expertise commensurately. Yeah. Like, you can pay us a much smaller amount than you would have to pay to have that person full-time on your staff.
Exactly. And that's what's so funny. Just the way you said it is, the dealership could pay for that, in 6-figure funds, or they could use a service like COOPABLE, which in my opinion is one of its kind, because you guys come in and you help make it easier and you simplify it. And you even just oversee and make sure that the co-op funds are getting reimbursed correctly, because I can only imagine how difficult it is to have, outstanding, open funds and accounts for all that money coming from the OEM. That's got to be mind blowing to keep track of that.
Yeah, and so that's why you mentioned earlier the turnkey vendors. I think that's why a lot of dealerships just fall into that trap. We call it the OEM mafia. It's where it's like you're going to use these vendors whether you want to or not, because it's easy and it's just, you don't have to think about too much. So one of the things we really try to focus on is making whatever vendors you want to work with turnkey, right? Because we're going to handle the entire process. We do the submissions for pre-approval. We do the actual submissions. We get compliance approval if you need that. If, God forbid, you're missing documentation or you have a proof of payment come back from the OEM, we handle all of that. So we try to make it even easier than turnkey, which is like, we will literally handle anything you want to. So don't worry about picking from this list of 4 vendors that the OEM is mandating. Pick whoever you want, who you think is best for you. And then we'll let you know within the guidelines of the program how you can use that vendor, how much you can get reimbursed, and then we'll take care of it for you so that there's no missing funds, there's no missing documents, there's no, oops, we forgot to submit it by the guidelines. Like, we submit everything early, we submit it completely. And then, we give you a report at the end of the month that says, hey, here's everything we did for you, and here's all your existing opportunities. So for us, we look at this as a way of saying to a dealership, if you'd like to stop thinking about this 800-pound gorilla that's occupying 5, 6, 7 hours, 10 hours of your time, let us do it for you. And by the way, it'll cost a lot less money than you doing it yourself, and it will be done a lot better. Yeah,
that's right. Well, just like you said it best, is it's like taking any vendor and any program and turning that into an IMR turnkey, where it's simple, it's easy, that it can be reimbursed correctly. I can't tell you how many times when I was on the dealer side of it that we would have to pick something that was IMR turnkey, and it was either not the best vendor, or it wasn't the best solution. And we wanted to find something that was better than that, but we couldn't, because we were really bound by having to spend what existed in the co-op account. That just makes it confusing and makes it hard, and you're not getting the right solution. You're having to work with a vendor you might not want to. Not saying they were a bad vendor, but there were just other opportunities that we would want to go after. How often do you see it where dealers get their end of month report and they're like, holy crap, you helped me save how much money?
I think it's really enlightening for a lot of folks. And, it's one of these situations where you've got one of a few situations in the dealership. Normally you've got a GM who's doing it himself. So like I said, how much time does a GM really want to spend on that? But it takes a lot of time. I mean, you've got to get all the documents together. Every single program is different, right? So if you're overseeing 2, 3, 4 different brands, that's 2 or 3 or 4 different programs you have to be an expert in. And so there's the GM who's doing it, who doesn't really have the time. Or you've got somebody else in the dealership, whether it's a marketing director, again, not an expert, Or you've got maybe, I talked to a dealership the other day who actually had their HR person doing it. I'm like, danger,
my
Will
word.
Robinson. Like,
Yeah.
no. So those situations can all be, I think, easily remedied by, using a service like COOPABLE. And like you said, we really are the only one in the business who's fully dedicated to this. So when I say service like COOPABLE, I mean COOPABLE.
Yeah.
But when, so those are some danger, kind of things that you have. But the other problem is sometimes when I'll talk to a dealership and they'll say, oh, we have vendors submitting that for us. Well, to me, that is like you're just letting the wolf right into the hen house.
Yeah,
right
that's right.
Right, because it's amazing how often your traditional media guy will come back and say, "Hey, guess what? You had $12,000 of co-op available. Unbelievably, that's exactly the amount of budget we were going to propose for your spend this month. So
exactly,
don't worry about it." Right. So I think it's important to have a third party who's agnostic, who's looking at this and saying, here's what you could be doing. Now, if you want a recommendation, we have marketing experience. We can help with that, but that's not our core function. Our core function is just to handle the co-op. So, when you talk about a dealership saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe you saved this much money. I can't believe you found us this much money. I can't believe we have this much money to spend. I always kind of look at it in the context of, NADA or anybody who says it, in the year 2024, it's costing about $700, right? Somewhere in that ballpark. You'll see a little bit higher, some a little bit lower. To sell a car with marketing.
Sure,
$700. Yeah.
Exactly.
So think about that. If you had $60,000 expire, that's 85 cars you should have sold with that money. So think about that. Not only are you letting that fund expire, but all those cars that you could have sold that you didn't, or that you had to pay out of pocket to sell, that's where the real waste is, I think. So we're trying to help people avoid that wasted spend and ultimately sell more cars.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think it's threefold. One, you're trying to make it easier and more efficient for that dealer. Two, you're trying to make sure they're not wasting that spend. And three, you're just trying to make sure that the spend that they do have is actually more efficient and it's with the right vendors and it's with the right programs. That way they're really getting more sales out of that as opposed to just spending, 10, 20, 30 grand on either a specific direct mail piece or even billboards because they're just the easiest stuff to get co-opted. Mm-hmm. Like there's so many more opportunities out there for dealers. So what advice would you give to dealers on ways that they can simplify that co-op process? I mean, other than working with COOPABLE, right?
So the first thing is give us a call, go to coopable.com and fill out the form for an audit. Yeah. So that's number one, right?
Audit one,
but, let's say that, you're trying to manage this yourself or you're trying to work through, some existing processes. Maybe you just don't have the bandwidth or the headcount or the funds to pay somebody like a COOPABLE. I would say the number one thing is just try to make sure that you are staying on top of the changes. And I think that's the biggest thing because the programs, I think this is what they really don't understand is that the OEMs want you to use this money. They really do. And I think a lot of dealerships, we have conversations with lots of OEMs all the time. Who come to us asking for us on this. And they say, like, we just can't get these people to spend the money. I'm like, well, you don't make it easy, guys.
That's right.
If you want them to spend the money, make it a little easier. And, an example of this is we have one of the big domestic OEMs this year. They made a change to third parties, right? So some of the third-party classifieds were no longer covered under co-op. Well, they buried that somewhere on paragraph 12 of page 64.
Oh, great. They didn't even tell their dealers.
They didn't really tell. I mean, they sent an email. They did the thing, but you know how GM's email box looks, right? So
yeah, it's true.
Q2 comes and goes. These dealerships are spending 15, 20, 25 grand a month on this third party. So by the time Q2 wraps up, time to do all your submissions. Oh, that's not approved anymore. There's $60,000 to $70,000 gone.
Wow.
So I would just say stay on top of the program as much as you possibly can. And it's really difficult, obviously, if you've got 10 or 15 brands you're working with, because that's 10 or 15 different programs and none of them are the same. So I would say that try your best to stay on top of it, submit in a timely fashion, because that is really the critical thing, right? Every day you're letting this go by is a day that you have an opportunity to have a fund expire. And then just really figure out how co-op can best support you and your goals, right? So if you're trying to sell 200 cars a month, okay, work that backwards. How much funds do I have? How much funds am I going to get if I do sell that many cars? How can I leverage these funds and use them in the best possible way, rather than just doing what's easiest? Because what we find, Jordan, is what's easiest is almost never best.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. If people have questions about this, we'll have you tagged in the LinkedIn comments. We'll also have you tagged in the podcast comments so they can reach out to you on LinkedIn. And they can also check out coopable.com. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
Thanks, Jordan.